A killer plot twist can be the cherry on top of a good movie, elevating it to greatness and ensuring that you immediately want to rewatch it from the beginning in order to observe it through an entirely new context. But every so often, filmmakers might decide to cast convention aside and blindside viewers with a plot twist early on, right at the beginning in fact. It's a bold, risky move given that general audiences enjoy the conventions of formulaic storytelling, but when it works, it really works. And so, with that being said, movies that cleverly start with huge twists. Scream 6. Scream 6, for all of its third act misgivings, totally detonated fan expectations in its opening 10 minutes by doing the one thing nobody ever expected: unmasking one of its Ghostface killers right away. Rather than merely opening with a grisly kill scene per the series formula, the murder of film teacher Laura Crane is immediately followed by Ghostface removing their mask, revealing them to be one of Crane's young students, Jason, played by Tony Revolori. Just 6 minutes in, we have a Ghostface identity confirmed, and to twist the knife further, it's then confirmed that he's a college friend of Tara's, played by Jenna Ortega. And there's one final twist to come before the titles. Jason returns to his apartment only to discover that his fellow Ghostface copycat Greg has been murdered, at which point one of the movie's real Ghostface killers promptly emerges and kills him. Even though Jason's stint in the film was short-lived, this scene nevertheless saw the franchise finally toy around with its well-trodden-to formula, and do so without getting excessively cutesy and meta about it. I'm looking at you, Scream 4.
1917. The opening moments of 1917 are very clear in laying out the mission that our two leading characters must embark on. Young soldiers Schofield and Blake are tasked with delivering a message to a nearby battalion, which, if they are successful, will save countless British lives. Blake also has personal stakes in this quest, as his older brother is among the men who will be saved if they reach their destination on time and everything goes to plan. While Blake and Schofield are on even footing in terms of screen time and dialogue, the familial tie Blake has to the mission makes you believe that he's the main protagonist, that he'll see the movie through to the end and reunite with his brother. Predictable as that would be, that's exactly what would happen in most movies. And so it was a bit of a shock when Blake was stabbed by a German soldier quite early in the film, causing him to bleed out in Schofield's arms. Not only did this twist kill off the guy we thought was the hero, but it also completely destroyed the happy family reunion ending we all had in our heads. It also sent a clear message that nobody was safe in this movie, not even the main characters. A clever way to keep viewers invested in Schofield's journey, making audiences worried for his life whenever he encountered any enemy forces.
Fresh. Though the trailers for the unhinged horror film Fresh made it clear that Sebastian Stan's hunky protagonist Steve is actually something untoward, the marketing was sensibly restrained in refusing to reveal precisely how depraved the guy really is. An opening meet-cute between Steve and protagonist Noah, played by Daisy Edgar-Jones, leads to a whirlwind love affair, but after Noah agrees to a weekend away with him, he drugs her cocktail. When Noah awakens, she's chained up, and Steve not only calmly explains that he drugged her, but that he's going to surgically remove pieces of her body over time in order to sell them to his wealthy cannibalistic clients. Yup. Needless to say, the marketing and the movie itself led viewers to assume that Steve was only going to abduct Noah and keep her prisoner for his own sadistic pleasure. But the cannibalistic twist makes the whole setup so much more deranged.
Downsizing. While Downsizing is ultimately a masterclass in how to squander an awesome concept, its first 20 minutes or so are actually really great, even if they do set up an interesting movie that, in the end, never really happens. At the heart of the film is an irreversible process called downsizing, which involves shrinking people down to a few centimeters tall in order to combat global warming and overpopulation. Paul Safranek and his wife Audrey eventually decide to go small themselves, with all the benefits of downsizing, such as good for the environment, financial gain, proving difficult to resist. At this stage, Downsizing seems intent on telling a story about Paul and Audrey's married life within the downsized community. But in an unbelievably cruel twist, Paul undergoes the procedure only to discover that Audrey has backed out at the last minute and will not be joining him. This was a genuinely shocking turn because it was clear that Audrey really did love Paul, but the fear of leaving her family and friends simply got the better of her. By leaving Paul on his own, the twist made you feel deeply sorry for him. A smart decision by the writers because it gave viewers a firm emotional connection to the downsized world, which otherwise may have felt too silly and distant. In the end though, Downsizing threw all of that good work away by going with a random and nonsensical end-of-the-world plot instead. Alien. Ridley Scott's iconic 1979 sci-fi horror begins with the crew of the Nostromo investigating a distress signal emanating from a nearby moon. During this little side quest, one of the crew members, Kane, is attacked by a mysterious alien creature that attaches itself to his face and will not let go. It's a simple and slow setup to the movie that nonetheless builds up heaps of tension, because while the title Alien tells you that Kane probably won't be the last person to have an encounter, it's not clear where the next threat will come from, creating a feeling of unease that is only heightened when Kane seems to make a full recovery. But then, BAM! Out of nowhere, an alien bursts out of his chest and runs off into the ship, destroying the calm of the dinner table scene like a bullet through glass. Easily one of the most shocking twists of all time, Kane's horrific demise instantly turned the movie into a fight for survival against an unstoppable and unpredictable enemy, while the deaths of actors like John Hurt, Tom Skerritt and Harry Dean Stanton, who were all big names at the time, added another twisty layer to proceedings in that nobody expected the then unknown Sigourney Weaver to be the main star of the film. While Scott doesn't always churn out gold, Alien is a brilliant example of how to lull audiences into a false sense of security before pulling the rug out from under them in a deeply disturbing fashion.
Aliens. Ridley Scott's original Alien ends with the Nostromo's sole human survivor Ellen Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver, entering stasis in an escape pod with the ship's cat Jones for the trip back to Earth. If this led many to assume that James Cameron's sequel Aliens would likely pick up on Earth, that's not quite what happens. Aliens instead opens with Ripley being rescued in space by a salvage crew, at which point both she and the audience are informed that she's been stuck in hypersleep considerably longer than expected. As it turns out, Ripley spent 57 years drifting through the core systems before the crew stumbled upon her. And because that's not enough of a shock to her, she's then informed that her young daughter Amanda died 2 years prior, aged 66. It's a brutal, immediately compelling start to the movie, and though the news of her daughter's death was bafflingly cut from Alien's theatrical release, it's so joltingly vital in informing her character arc throughout, namely her maternal bond with the young survivor Newt, played by Carrie Henn.
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. While everybody knew that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse would centre on the Miles Morales version of the character, we also knew that Peter Parker would have a role to play too. And when the movie starts off, Peter is this universe's Spider-Man, a superhero that the citizens of New York adore and a menace that the police despise. Then, when Miles gets his own spider powers and has a run-in with Peter, the movie seems to be heading towards a Parker-Morales-Spidey team-up, where the two heroes combine forces to take down ruthless mob boss Kingpin in order to stop him from reactivating his particle accelerator and destroying the city. But that changes in an instant when, just past the 20-minute mark, Peter has his skull bashed in by Kingpin. Aside from the fact that this twist resulted in the brutal murder of the most famous Marvel character in the world, it also completely blindsided people who were, reasonably so, expecting a traditional portrayal of Peter Parker, something more in line with how he was depicted early in the movie, and something more akin to the countless other portrayals we've seen in movies, comics, and games over the years. Instead, we got something unexpected, a slacker, down on his luck Peter Parker who is about as far away from conventional Spidey as it's possible to get.
The Lodge. The Lodge is an extremely unnerving psychological horror film about a soon-to-be stepmother Grace, played by Riley Keough, who becomes stranded at her fiancé Richard's, played by Richard Armitage, rural lodge with his 2 resentful children over Christmas. The movie's trailers only briefly allude to the kid's mother, who is implied to be out of the picture for one reason or another. And so, the film begins by introducing us to said mother, Laura, played by Alicia Silverstone, as she meets with Richard, who informs her that he wants to finalise their divorce so he can marry Grace. A visibly upset Laura leaves, heads home, pours herself a glass of wine, and then shoots herself in the head. Given that Silverstone's character was paid barely any mind in the Lodge's marketing at all, to see her show up for a small cameo and exit the film in such uncompromisingly brutal fashion was a major shock, especially given that it's the polar opposite of the frothier roles that Silverstone usually takes.
Predators. While Predators isn't remembered as fondly as the first film in the series, it's quite underrated. A really solid sci-fi thriller with a handful of cool action sequences. The movie kicks off with a group of strangers being parachuted into the jungle. Confused and with no idea how they got there, they naturally start to question why they're all in the same place, and most importantly, where the hell they actually are. After a few minutes of everyone trudging through the jungle and some speculation that they might be in Asia, Africa, or the Amazon rainforest, the group arrives at higher ground, where de facto leader Royce points out that the sun hasn't moved since they arrived, leading to the twist reveal that they're not on Earth, they're on an alien planet. After the original two Predator movies saw the titular creatures hunting their prey on Earth, having another movie with that same formula would have felt like more of the same. But switching up the rules by planting the beasts on home turf was a clever way to raise the stakes significantly. In addition, most viewers will have probably just expected the movie to take place on Earth, given that, again, that's where the first two movies and the Alien vs Predator spin-offs were set. With that in mind, the twist reveal smartly played with audience expectations, surprising people who might have thought that the movie's mix of a jungle setting and a macho band of soldiers was hugely derivative of the 1987 Arnie classic.
The Fast and the Furious. If you watch the original The Fast and the Furious without knowing too much about it, you'd probably take its opening scene at face value. The Brian O'Connor, played by Paul Walker, is simply a hot-headed boy racer who crosses paths with Dominic Toretto, played by Vin Diesel's crew, and is sweet on Dom's sister Mia, played by Jordana Brewster. But at the end of the first act, Brian is pulled over by the cops, and after he's driven to the nearby police station, it's revealed that Brian is in fact an undercover cop, attempting to infiltrate Dom's heist crew. Somewhat ironically, for any viewers who joined the Fast franchise later on, there's a good chance they might have forgotten about Brian being a former cop altogether, if they even knew at all. And so, going back to watch the original movie for the first time, even if you've seen some of the more recent sequels, this twist can actually still work.
Moon. The opening scenes of Moon show space miner Sam Bell going about his work. Employed by Lunar Industries to harvest fuel from the moon's soil, Sam's job means that he's completely isolated, living out of the Serang mining base until his 3-year contract ends. While the operation is running smoothly, Sam has started suffering from headaches, and you get the sense that he's slowly losing the plot due to his mundane daily routine, and the fact that his only source of conversation is a robot AI, Gertie, who helps him out around the base. But as revealed by the film's early twist, Sam isn't as alone as he thinks he is. Shortly after he crashes his lunar rover, he encounters a doppelganger of himself, learning that Lunar Industries has been cloning the original Sam Bell and killing them once their contract expires, in order to avoid the hassle of training new staff. The great thing about putting this twist so early in the film is that you'd normally expect a "he's a clone" reveal to come in the end portion of the story. By placing it near the start instead, and creating such a seismic shift in Sam's perception of his own little world, Moon felt truly unpredictable. And fittingly, the rest of the story unfolds in a whole host of startling ways.
Confessions. 2010's Japanese thriller Confessions revolves around a grieving mother and high school teacher Yuko, played by Takako Matsu, who carries out a dastardly scheme to avenge her young daughter's drowning death at the hands of 2 of her students. If this might sound like a typical slow burn revenge thriller plot, Confessions wastes no time at all in hurling an absolutely loony twist at viewers. The film's gut-wrenching opening sees Yuko reveal all this information to her class, before announcing that she injected the 2 culprits' milk cartons with the HIV-infected blood of her daughter's father, causing mass panic in the class as the 2 boys responsible fear that they will contract HIV as a result. Now, of course, the chances of getting HIV from drinking milk tainted with infected blood are very slim, but kids being kids, they certainly don't know that. And it immediately assures audiences that this isn't going to be your garden variety revenge thriller, one which remains thoroughly demented all the way to the end, in fact.
Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame was plastered across movie news sites from the second it was announced until the second it was released. But impressively, and in spite of how much coverage the project received, it still sported a ton of great surprises for fans to enjoy, surprises that started popping up within the first few minutes of the film. Once Tony and Nebula reach Earth and reunite with the remaining heroes, they all jet off to confront Thanos, hoping to use the Infinity Stones to reverse the villain's devastating snap from the end of Infinity War. But when they find him, the true hopelessness of the situation hits home. Thanos has destroyed the stones in order to remove them from the equation, a revelation that enrages Thor so much that he chops off Thanos' head. The screen then fades to black, leading to a 5-year time jump and a completely different movie than a lot of fans expected. Even though a time jump had been heavily rumoured before the movie's release, this entire sequence of events was still surprising on several fronts. For starters, nobody was sure how Thanos would factor into Endgame's story, and the last thing anyone guessed was that he would die within the first 10 minutes. Plus, a lot of fans had been predicting that the Avengers would use the stones to reverse the snap, and while that eventually came true, learning that they were initially destroyed caught a lot of people off guard and made them second-guess their own predictions. Overall though, the fact that the time jump led to a slow and dramatic 30 or 40 minutes in this crowd-pleasing superhero blockbuster was an almost unprecedented move on Marvel's part, and it really set the tone for an emotional, unpredictable, and satisfying conclusion to the Infinity Saga.
Saw X. You can argue that Saw X's real twist was that it was actually a good movie, but it also offered up a few neat subversions of the series' expected formula, such as placing its most intriguing reveal not at the end, but the beginning. More to the point, the twist was inflicted on John Kramer, aka Jigsaw, played by Tobin Bell himself, rather than being the one to administer some not so welcome news upon one of his hapless victims. Saw X is a prequel set between the first two Saw films, where a cancer-riddled Kramer learns of an experimental treatment spearheaded by Dr. Celia Pedersen and agrees to undergo the procedure in Mexico. Though surgery apparently goes well, the movie's big early reveal is that John has been scammed. The entire clinic was a front created by Pedersen to swindle desperate, terminally ill people out of their money. The moment that John realizes what's happened is punctuated with all the hallmarks of a classic Saw twist, a flashback montage illustrating pivotal moments within their shocking new context, and a musical cue nodding to Charlie Klaus's iconic Hello Zep theme.
Scream. While Drew Barrymore's movie stardom has faded in recent years, she was a much hotter property back in the late 90s, with roles in Batman Forever, Wayne's World 2, and E.T. already under her belt. And so, when she showed up in 1996 slasher horror Scream, it was widely assumed that she'd have a massive role to play. Hell, at one stage she was actually attached to play lead character Sidney Prescott, a role that eventually went to Neve Campbell. But director Wes Craven and writer Kevin Williamson knew that audiences were expecting Barrymore to have a massive role, which is precisely why they cast her in the project. And so, in a shocking turn of events and a scene that's still effective to this day, Barrymore is stabbed and killed by the eternally creepy Ghostface, who drags her bloody corpse across the lawn and hangs it from a tree. On top of the shock value of killing someone as famous as Barrymore in such a brutal fashion, this twist, which occurred in the very first scene, informed viewers that nobody was truly safe, creating exactly the kind of uncomfortable atmosphere you want in a horror movie.
The Hunt. 2020's controversial satirical action horror flick The Hunt was marketed on, said controversy aside, the strength of its ensemble cast. The likes of Emma Roberts, Justin Hartley, Ike Barinholtz, and Betty Gilpin were featured extensively in the trailers as a group of working-class deplorables who have been kidnapped by wealthy elites and are now hunted for sport. The movie itself begins with the deplorables all waking up gagged in a forest, and while audiences quite reasonably assume that the more famous faces among the cast will be sticking around for a while, that's not quite what happens. The first to go is Roberts, who gets shot through the head by a sniper rifle, while about a minute later, Hartley's character steps on a landmine and is blown to smithereens. 5 minutes after this, funny man Barinholtz gets shotgunned to death by the owner of a nearby service station, leaving Betty Gilpin's Crystal as basically the only lead actor still standing, in turn confirming her to be the de facto protagonist. Given that Emma Roberts is probably the most of note actor playing any of the deplorables, seeing her in particular get her brain matter splattered barely 10 minutes into the movie was a major shock.
Knives Out. Knives Out was sold as a classic whodunit, leading most viewers to expect a murder mystery with a simple-ish layout. A crime is committed, a detective investigates, and the culprit is revealed after a handful of twists and turns. But writer-director Rian Johnson, a huge fan of whodunits, is well aware of all the trappings and expectations surrounding the genre, and so he chose to do things a little bit differently when crafting this movie. The film revolves around the untimely death of wealthy novelist Harlan Thrombey, and while watching you assume that we won't find out who killed him until the final couple of scenes, but surprisingly we learn what happened much earlier than that, when a lengthy sequence near the beginning of the film shows us that Harlan's nurse, Marta, doomed him with an accidental overdose. Sure, Harlan's death isn't as straightforward as it first seems, and Marta isn't entirely guilty, but it was thoroughly surprising to be given so much information up front, a clear indicator that Knives Out would be far from a conventional murder mystery.
Irreversible. Gaspar Noé's highly controversial thriller Irreversible is a unique case of this because the audience doesn't actually realise it's a plot twist until later in the movie, and even then it's easily missed. The film, which plays scenes in reverse chronological order, ends with the climax in which Pierre, played by Albert Dupontel, beats a man to death with a fire extinguisher. We learn later that this was in revenge for said man allegedly assaulting and almost fatally beating his ex-partner Alex. Yet during the scene of Alex's attack itself, it's clear that the assailant wasn't this man. Basically, Pierre and Alex's current partner Marcus, played by Vincent Cassel, got the wrong guy, but it gets even worse than that. Anyone with the stomach to ever revisit Irreversible might notice that during the opening scene where the mistaken perpetrator was killed, the actual attacker is standing literally feet away from him. Though it's easy to miss this given the visually disorientating nature of the film's brutal opening scene, ultimately, the real villain is never caught or brought to justice.
Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Even though everybody knows the story these days, imagine watching Terminator 2 Judgment Day for the first time, immediately after the original film, without seeing any of the trailers or reading anything about it. A lot of viewers back in 1991 probably experienced the movie in this way, and for those lucky sods, it packs an absolutely killer twist in its opening act. In the original film, Arnie's ruthless T-800 robot was the unstoppable villain hunting down the helpless Sarah Connor and was only defeated after the explosive sacrifice of future soldier Kyle Reese, as well as a little help from a nearby hydraulic press. The T-800 instantly became an iconic baddie, and so when Terminator 2 rolled around 7 years later, there was no reason to expect that the character would be anything less than a nasty piece of work. The movie itself plays into this too, showing Arnie beating up a gang of bikers and stealing their gear. But brilliantly, that expectation wasn't met, not even close. As John Connor is being chased by both the T-800 and an inquisitive police officer, it's revealed that the latter is actually the one who's been sent by Skynet, while the former has been assigned to keep the Connor bloodline safe this time around. In one fell swoop, one of cinema's greatest baddies became one of cinema's greatest heroes, a twist that almost nobody saw coming, and a decision that completely altered the course of the franchise, for better or worse, depending on how you view the sequels.